76 the sky was red, thunder rumbling overhead. Bad King George couldn't sleep in his bed, and on that army morn, old Uncle Sam was born. Nobody who was anybody believed it. Everybody who was anybody, they doubted it. Nobody had faith. Nobody.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm here. Let's start with why I'm here. I have history here, and I have a love of this state, and I know this state, and I know the West. And I'm concerned about the West, and I'm concerned about its future, as well as I am the entire country. So the bad thing is that most of the American people are being marginalized, and just a small percentage are being represented. Yeah. And what we have in this current system, this current situation, is a group of people who have control of the bully pulpit. They have control of both houses. They have a very, very narrow, mean mindset. And they don't represent all of our best interests, which are the public interests. So the future, you know, I'm doing whatever I can. That's a small part. I'm very concerned about the future that my kids, their kids, and those to come are going to inherit. I am concerned that if things don't change quickly, and I was just in Washington last week for a concert called The Vote for Change, and I was very, very moved because the Sundance Channel was able to broadcast it because nobody else would touch it. We do not have an inclusive government. We have a government that spins everything, so how can we find out where the truth is? So when we hear, yeah, there's a difference of opinion, you know, want a little more arsenic in the water, they say, no problem. I say there is a problem. And so they say, okay, taxpayer dollars are going to pay for cleaning up toxic waste. I said, no, I think the polluters should pay for that. So I'm assuming all of us here agree with that, but how are we going to get that word out unless we just knuckle down? And isn't it sad that we have to do it? Isn't it sad that we have to fight so hard for something that is our right, that is our inalienable right? This is the public interest. This group, this administration doesn't own the country. The country belongs to you. And isn't it sad that you have to fight so hard to get your voice heard, which should be automatic? We better get it quick. I don't think we can take another 4 years.
I don't think there's any such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. I think the worst thing that could happen to the environment is it becomes the province of a single political party. But you can't talk honestly about the environment in any context today without speaking critically about this president. This is the worst environmental president that we have had in American history. The latest Gallup poll shows 81% of Republicans consider themselves environmentalists, want stronger environmental laws, and want them strictly enforced, of the rank and file. And the problem is the press is not doing its job. The journalist's job is to find the truth and then convey it to the public. And this press corps, the Fourth Estate, has let down the American people. And if this president is reelected, after the job that he has done in destroying so much of this country and so many of the wonderful things, that the values that America represents, it will because the press has not done its job of informing the American public what is happening in this country today. The White House itself has mounted a stealth attack against the environment. They've kept it deliberately secret because they know it would offend the American people if they knew about this. They've used Orwellian rhetoric. When they're going to destroy the forest, they call it the Healthy Forests Act. When they're going to destroy the air, they call it the Clear Skies Bill. But they most insidiously have put polluters in charge of all of the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. The head of the Forest Service is a timber industry lobbyist, Mark Ray, the most rapacious timber industry lobbyist in American history. The head of public lands is a mining industry lobbyist, Stephen Griles, who believes that public lands are unconstitutional. The head of the air division at EPA is utility lobbyist Jeffrey Homestead, who's represented nothing but the worst polluters, air polluters in America. The head of Superfund is a woman whose last job was advising corporate polluters how to evade Superfund. The second in command of EPA is a Monsanto lobbyist, and so on and so on. If you go through all of the subsecretariats and all of the agency heads in the Department of Agriculture, Energy, Interior, and EPA, it's the same thing. And these are individuals who have not, as I show in my book, who have not entered government service for the public interest, but rather specifically to subvert the very laws they're now charged with enforcing in order to enrich the president's corporate paymaster. And this is already having a profound effect on quality of life of the American people. The problem is the press is not telling us why this is happening, and so most Americans don't know. And I'll give you a few examples just from the energy industry. A couple of months ago, the New York Times published a report that showed that 1 out of every 4 black children in American cities now has asthma. I have 3 sons who have asthma. We don't know why we're having this epidemic of pediatric asthma now, but we do know that asthma attacks are caused primarily by bad air days, by ozone and particulates in our air, and we know that the principal source of those materials in our atmosphere are 1,100 coal-burning power plants that are burning coal illegally. It's been illegal for 15 years. They were supposed to have cleaned up. The Clinton administration was prosecuting the 50 worst and had investigations of 70 more. But this is an industry that donated $48 million to President Bush during the 2000 campaign and has given $58 million since. And almost immediately after coming into office, this president ordered the Justice Department to drop those lawsuits and the EPA to drop those investigations. The top 3 enforcers of EPA resigned their jobs after receiving that order. The Justice Department lawyer said that this had never happened before in American history, where a presidential candidate accepts money from a criminal targeted by federal prosecutors, and then once he gets into office, orders the federal prosecutors to drop those prosecutions. Whereas the EPA says that just those 70 plants that had that were targeted by the prosecutors, just the criminal emissions from those plants alone kill 5,500 Americans every year. And then the president went and repealed the new source review provision of the Clean Air Act, the heart and soul, the most important provision of the Clean Air Act, which is the provision that requires those plants to clean up in the first place, so that now those plants will never, ever have to clean up the ozone and particulates. According to EPA, that decision alone is killing 30,000 Americans every single year, 10 World Trade Centers. This should be on the headlines every single day, but the press is ignoring it. Last week, the EPA announced that in 19 states, it is now unsafe to eat any freshwater fish in the state because of mercury contamination. In 48 states, at least some of the fish are now unsafe to eat. In fact, the only states where fish are safe to eat are Wyoming and Alaska, where the Republican-controlled legislatures refuse to authorize the money to test the fish. But in all the other states, the fish are unsafe to eat. The principal source of mercury, 60% of it is coming from those same 1,100 coal-burning power plants. We know a lot about mercury that we didn't know 10 years ago. We know, for example, that 1 out of every 6 American women now has so much mercury in her womb that her children are at risk for a grim inventory of diseases, including autism, blindness, mental retardation, heart, liver, and kidney disease. I recently had my own levels of mercury measured. My levels are about 3 times what is considered safe, just from eating fish. I was told by Dr. David Carpenter, who's the national authority on mercury contamination, that a woman with my levels of mercury in her womb would have a child with cognitive impairment. I said to him, "You mean might have?" And he said, "No, the science is very certain she would have children with brain damage." And he estimated a permanent IQ loss on those children of 5 to 7 points over their lifetimes. There are now 630,000 children born in America every single year who have been exposed to dangerous levels of mercury in their mother's womb. Bill Clinton, recognizing this catastrophic national health epidemic, reclassified mercury as a hazardous pollutant under the Clean Air Act. That triggered a requirement that those power plants remove 90% of the mercury within 3.5 years. It would have cost them less than 1% of plant revenues to do it. But that's a great deal for the American people, but it's still billions of dollars for that industry. And this is the industry that gave over $100 million to this president. And 8 weeks ago, this White House announced that it was revoking the Clinton-era rules and substituting instead rules that were written by utility industry lawyers. And those rules will require that the utilities effectively never have to clean up that mercury. In May, I was down in West Virginia, flying over the coal fields where this coal is coming from. And if the people of this country could see what I saw, there would be a revolution in this country. We are cutting down the Appalachian Mountains. We are, with giant machines, 22 stories high, called drag lines, 2,500 tons of dynamite that are exploded every day in the state of West Virginia. We are blowing the tops off the mountains. These companies, these big multinationals, blowing the tops off the mountaintops. These historic landscapes where Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone roamed, the source of our values, our virtues, our character as a people. We're cutting them to the ground. They blow off the tops to get at the coal seams beneath, and then they plow the mountaintops, the debris and the rubble, into our streams and rivers. They've already buried 1,200 miles of streams. If this president is reelected, by the time he leaves office, they will have flattened a section of the Appalachian Mountains the size of Delaware, the whole state of Delaware. It's illegal. We went to court. You cannot, in the United States of America, put rock and debris and rubble and toxic waste into a river system without a Clean Water Act permit. And you could never get a permit to do it. And we went to court and we stopped them. We got an injunction from a federal judge against all mountaintop mining. 2 days from when Judge Hayden issued that injunction, the White House changed one word in the Clean Water Act to change the entire meaning of the act and to make it legal today in this country, in any state, to dump rock and debris and rubble into any water body without a Clean Water Act permit. They changed 30 years of Clean Water Act interpretation and opened up all of our rivers and waterways to dumping of solid waste just to please Peabody Coal and some of the other big shots in West Virginia. And today, mountaintop mining, despite our court order, is continuing apace. And this is what the issue is. You know, the White House is always trying to marginalize environmentalists by saying, you know, they're tree huggers and they're, you know, people, pagans who worship trees and sacrifice people, and that they're radicals. There's nothing radical about clean air and clean water. We are protecting nature, not for the sake of the fishes and the birds, but for our own sake, because we recognize that nature enriches us. It's the infrastructure of our community. And if we want to meet our obligation as a nation, as a civilization, as a generation, which is to create communities for our children that provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the landscapes that enrich us, that connect us to our past, that root us in community, that provide context to our community, that are the sources of our values, our virtues, our character as a people, those things that define America for what it is. And today they're all on the auction block because of this administration. And if you ask the people who are promoting these kind of initiatives in this administration, why are you doing this? They lie and they lie and they lie. And they will not tell you what they're doing, and they're trying to mask this radical agenda from the American public. But if you talk with one of their apologists who tries to be honest and put the best face on this, what he'll tell you is, well, we have to choose now between economic prosperity on the one hand and environmental protection on the other. And that is a false choice. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generations, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what George Bush has been urging us to do, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy. But our children are going to pay for our joyride, and they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they'll never be able to pay. In a true free market economy, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat who's using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market. You know, we are living in a science fiction nightmare today, where we are bringing children into a world, millions of American children who are asthmatic like my kids, who are being brought into a world where the air is too poisonous for them to breathe because somebody gave money to a politician. And when they give our children asthma, they are imposing costs on the rest of us that should, in a true free market economy, be reflected in the price of that company's product when it makes it to market. And what I do as an environmental activist is I go out into the market and I catch the cheaters. I don't even consider myself an environmentalist anymore. I'm a free marketeer. I go out and I catch the cheaters and I say to them, we're going to force you to internalize your costs the same way that you're internalizing your profits. Because as long as somebody cheats the free market, none of us, by polluting, none of us gets the advantages of the efficiency and the democracy that the marketplace promises our country. And we have to understand as an American people that there's a huge difference between free market capitalism, which democratizes our country, which makes us more prosperous and efficient, and the kind of corporate crony capitalism that has been embraced by this administration, which is as antithetical to democracy in America as it is in Nigeria.
I have spent my whole life studying foreign policy and international relations, and I have never, ever seen the world in such a mess. I hate to blame America because we are the greatest country in the world, but I've got to tell you that a lot of this is our doing. That some of the ways that this administration has carried out foreign policy has not made us safer, and it has lost our reputation and our credibility. As I can tell you, I do a lot of traveling, and people are just hungering for us to come on board because they have lost respect for our country and our ability to get things done. Our allies are not Lilliputians trying to tie down Gulliver. Our allies are force multipliers, and there's no reason that we should be bearing the full burden of what is going on in Iraq. And there's no reason that we can't do more with our allies in Afghanistan. And there's no reason that with our friends and allies we can't do a better job in places that this administration has paid no attention to, which is Africa and Latin America. The world really was very divided between the haves and the have-nots. The gap is very large. And what is interesting is that we are blamed for the gap to a great extent. So the bottom line is people admire America, they want to have what we have, and they think we're selfish. And that is a very uncomfortable place to be. American people, we don't have to be loved everywhere, and we don't have to have people be grateful to us all the time, but it sure would be nice to be respected.
Yes.
And it's fine to be feared by your enemies. It's not so great to be feared by your friends.
You know, when I traveled all over Europe, when I was a little boy with my father and with President Kennedy, and I saw these huge crowds, and I saw how, you know, they were so proud in Europe to name their streets after our presidents, after Teddy Roosevelt, John Kennedy, and George Washington, and how we were the moral authority of the world. And it took us 300 years to establish that reputation. And in 3.5 years, this president has completely destroyed it. From a $5 trillion surplus that Bill Clinton left us to a $5 trillion deficit, a $10 trillion shift in wealth, and almost all of it from the poor to the rich, in all these various ways that he's figured out, of Halliburton, and all of these, you know, nefarious ways that he's figured out how to shift the wealth of this country to the richest people in our country. And you know, I was raised in a milieu where I was taught that communism leads to dictatorship and that capitalism leads to democracy. But it's not that simple. Americans have to understand the difference between free market capitalism, which benefits our country, and this kind of corporate crony capitalism where we have large corporations running our government, and there's a name for that, and the name is fascism. And Franklin Roosevelt said that. He said fascism is the control of government by large corporations for their own benefit. And I actually, and I close with this, I have an American Heritage Dictionary, the last edition, which I keep at home, which says it defines fascism as the control of government by large corporations with right-wing ideology driven by bellicose nationalism. If that sounds familiar.
Like all other groups who struggle for an equal voice, our gains, slow but steady marches toward full empowerment, have always depended most on how we empower and fight for each other. It is said that the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. The power of these words lies in their truth. They are not merely recognition of the biological fact that women produce the world's generations, but a raw and rare acknowledgement of our strength, our power, and how we can influence the world. However, power, while sometimes relinquished, is never freely given. It is hard fought for and hard won. The attainment of real power, while much closer than it was in 1776, remains elusive. It eludes us everywhere, from the halls of government to our own homes. Our right to choose, our right to affordable health care, our right as women to fair and equal treatment under the Constitution without regard to race, sexual orientation, or religion are all at peril. More is always expected of us. We must exceed those expectations. Be agents of change. Lead the rebellion.
To begin with, empowering women benefits society as a whole. Power sharing with women is not just a matter of concern for those of us who are female. It should be a matter of national interest to every American. A nation that taps the talent of 100% of its people is a stronger nation. And no true meritocracy can exist if the capacity to contribute is constrained by gender. You are revolutionary women because you are acting to move our country in the direction of its most noble ideals. Revolutionary women are not anti-men, we are just pro-women. We are helping to form a more perfect union and move this country in the direction of its most noble ideals. But it takes each one of us speaking about the issue, raising the matter at every turn, pressing and advocating for inclusion at every opportunity. It may be in a conversation in which you change someone's mind about the issue, or by supporting a woman candidate. This struggle for gender equality is, in the end, essentially a patriotic struggle, a fight to make America stronger by showing it the way to new strength.
Because today, despite recent gains, women remain an undervalued and underdeveloped human resource. And this is not to say that women have trouble finding work. In many societies, they do the vast majority of the work, but they don't own land, and they aren't taught to read, and they can't obtain credit, and they don't get paid. In recent years, women around the world have made great progress in gaining legal recognition of their rights, but often, even if the laws are on the books and they are changed, the reality in villages and communities has not. And so appalling abuses are still being committed against women, and these include coerced abortions and dowry murders and honor crimes and even the killing of infants simply because they are born female. Some say all this is cultural and there's nothing anyone can do about it. I say it's criminal, and we each have an obligation to stop it. We also have an obligation to recognize that problems in pregnancy are the leading cause of death among women of reproductive age in developing countries. And every year, they kill an estimated 600,000. The bad news is that the number of such deaths is increasing. The good news is that we know how to reverse the trend, and it's called family planning. It's called giving women the power to exercise control over their own bodies and lives. Unfortunately, our current president sides with those who want to deny women the right to choose, who impose their own choices, and who eliminate funding to programs that save women's lives. The administration calls this pro-life. That's worse than irony. That is a tragedy.
But just last week, the Republicans in the House once again stripped out funding for international family planning as part of President Bush's all-out assault on women. And so I ask you, are you ready to engage? Are you ready to mobilize? Are you ready to empower? Are you ready to elect progressive women to defend our values?
Revolutions are not easy. Being a revolutionary woman is just not that simple. Be willing to subject yourself to the political process, to hold a high position, to stand up for what you believe may not be always a pleasant experience. So this is a long-term effort that we have to stay engaged in. We can't just wave a magic wand or have one election and expect that that will change the habits and attitudes of our people. When those baby boomers like me start retiring in a very few years, we know there will be tremendous strains on the Social Security system. Now, why does that matter to a young person? I suppose most young people think, well, that's a problem for older people. But it's not. It actually will determine the quality of life, the standard of living of the young. But I want you to remember that half of the women over 65 in this country live on Social Security. So we can make a decision that we're going to do away with it, or we're going to ignore it, we're going to let it peter out, and then we will have the kind of society that I don't think any of us would be proud of or want to live in. Or we can drastically cut the benefits. We can maintain a system, but it will be minimal and will subject millions of older Americans who thought that they could rely on this social contract to a very much reduced standard of living. Or we can turn to young people and impose very high onerous taxes in order to make up the difference. The combination of Social Security and Medicare have permitted countless American families to buy homes, to send children to college, to have a middle-class standard of living. And yet there are so many who seem to think that that's a problem of the past, or it only affects somebody else. No matter who is president, we're going to have a great debate about the future of Social Security and Medicare. And the people who have the most at stake in that debate are women. Older women who rely on Social Security and Medicare, middle-aged women who will otherwise take care of and assume even more responsibility for their mothers and their fathers and their grandparents, and younger women who will see their own prospects for a better, more prosperous future shrinking if we don't have the social contract with social insurance that provides the kind of benefits that we have for so long taken for granted. We can be revolutionary women, that we can help to revolutionize our country and the world on behalf of young people and children. But we can't do it without a lot of hard work. And we certainly can't do it without all of you supporting candidates, choosing to run yourself. Being involved in the American political process is a great adventure. Frustrating, heartbreaking, exhilarating, exciting, rewarding. It is all of that and more. And what I hope is that we will be able to look back to Boston and say a second American revolution started there. A revolution of higher expectations for involvement in our political system by girls and women and people of good faith everywhere. That would be truly a revolutionary.
Because 20 years the right wing has been planning and plotting and successfully taken over the Supreme Court and the White House and the Congress. You know, when Hillary Clinton talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy, she wasn't kidding around. And it's time for a vast center-left conspiracy to take our country back to the people that built it. It is not enough to vote anymore. When I was a governor, I used to go around to high schools and colleges and tell everybody how important it was to vote. But politics is too important to be left to politicians. We need your help. We don't need just your money and your hard work and your campaign. We need you to run for office. We need you to run for office, ordinary Americans, to take this country back on the feet.
Out of uncertainty and doubting, out of the conference bang and the brass platoon, it will come again.